Alive after 9 days, rescuers have reached 12 boys and their coach trapped in a cave in Thailand. Rescuers celebrate the breakthrough after divers had been pumping water from the caves for more than a week. Now the operation begins to bring the boys to the surface, the youngest of whom is just 11. The scene live from that dramatic rescue. Will have the latest on the ground. Also on Global, a huge political shake-up in Mexico. Andrés Manuel López Obrador promises to tackle corruption and violence. But how will the US react? And we'll have the latest from the World Cup in Russia, where the favourites Brazil are now through to the quarter-finals. This is Global. So let's go back to that extraordinary breaking news of the last hour or so. The Thai football team, lost for 9 days in an underground cave, have been found alive and well. All 12 boys and their football coach were discovered about 400 metres further from where they initially thought the teenagers were. They had actually moved to higher ground to avoid the rising waters. The bad weather had hampered the rescue efforts to find the youngsters, and they are aged between 11 and 16. And they are with their 25-year-old coach. They are there in this cave complex, which is one of Thailand's longest and toughest to explore. Let's bring in Howard Johnson, who's been covering this for us throughout the course of this rescue. And Howard, we're looking currently at the pictures right there at the scene, at the opening of this cave complex. A huge number of the rescue officials and the authorities there. But what is the latest you are hearing?
Yeah, what we're hearing is from the governor of the Chiang Rai province, this area in which the cave complex is in. He said more than an hour and a half ago that the 12 children and their football coach have been found alive. Now, what we're hearing at the moment is the Navy SEAL team and medics are assessing the health of the 13 to see if they're in any fit state to be moved. That will take 4 hours, according to the message from the governor. Now, we have to remember this is a flooded network of caves and caverns. It was extremely difficult for the team to get through there today. In fact, they had a bottleneck at one point to negotiate. It was full of mud. I assume today they cleared that and got through it. Now, to get back through, there's a series of chambers and caverns to pass through before they can get to the entrance. And the talk earlier on in the week was that they might even have to train the children how to use scuba gear just to get them through those caverns, to get them back to the entrance.
Howard, we're seeing a picture of those 12 boys. I mean, it is unimaginable the terror of what they have been through over the last 9 days. Is it thought, I don't know if you know, but is it thought that they now have someone with them, one of the divers or one of the rescue teams, or are they still on their own down there?
From what we hear, we assume that the Navy SEALs are with them and administering medical attention to them. That's what we heard from the governor. We're waiting for more reports, and what we know is that down there it's dark, it's very scary environment for these children aged between 11 and 16. It's rainy season here, so when it rains it really pours, it's torrential. So they must have experienced rising levels, they must have experienced hunger down there. They must have been thirsty. Perhaps they drank the water that was flowing through. It was at least free-flowing water, perhaps okay enough to drink to sustain them through this period. But for a child aged between 11 and 16, without the contact of their parents, without the contact of the world outside, it must have been incredibly scary. And now, of course, there's this big operation to get them out. The fear is that from Wednesday onwards, the rain will return to the area with a vengeance. It will come down, according to forecast, very heavily. So now the clock is ticking again. The teams have to get them out before this rain is forecast.
I'll come back to that thought in a moment, but you mentioned the parents and you've been there at the scene talking to them. It must have been excruciating the last 9 days.
Yeah, every day we walked into this area, this search and rescue camp next to the entrance to the cave. It's a huge sprawling area full of mud. It was very hot and humid there. As I said, it rained pretty much every day. Lots of tarpaulin tents up just to protect the family. They were in a tented area, and every day I walked past and saw the misery and the pain etched on their faces. No word for 9 days, nothing. Imagine the feeling for those parents. But we did see the Thai people rally around to support them. The Thai Prime Minister came along a few days ago and sat down and ate food with them and talked with them, talked about meditation with them, talked even about government policies, according to people on the ground next to the Prime Minister as he was speaking to them. Also, a monk came to visit. They had a prayer ceremony together. So the families tonight have been obviously elated. A grandmother came forward and said that she was just happy that the authorities never gave up. They just kept pushing through until they found the children. And tonight, even the Prime Minister, he said he wished to thank the tremendous efforts of all the international units who supported the Thai nation in this awful week for the country.
Howard, thanks once again, and we'll talk to some of those international teams in just a moment. But we're going to go from Howard straight to the cave complex, because Jonathan Head, our correspondent, is there for us, and Jonathan has been there throughout the 9 days with those rescue teams. Just give me a sense, first of all, Jonathan, about just the euphoria, how that moment was greeted by all of those rescue workers when they heard that news that the boys were alive.
Well, I can tell you there is a smile on everyone's face here, and people are absolutely delighted. The news had got better in the last 2 days. Hope had risen again from moments where I think people were really beginning to despair of the immense challenges of trying to get through to this spot where they believed the boys were. And remember, they didn't even know the boys were there. They could have been pushing, risking their lives to get somewhere and not find them. That was on everyone's minds as a possibility. This is much faster than we expected. They've been blocked by a tunnel which was full of sand and silt. They've got that out of the way, and they've moved through much faster than we expected to this area. Actually found the boys about 400 meters further than they'd expected. As far as we know, they are all more or less okay. We don't know what their state of health is, but the provincial government has described them as safe. So you can just imagine, I mean, people are rushing around, they're being interviewed. There's an absolute incredible media scrum. There are so many cars coming in and out. We're just waiting to hear a little bit more ultimately about the biggest challenge now, which is the operation to get the boys out, because it's taken the divers, and these are very experienced divers, such a long time to get through. There is concern about the possibility of heavy rain later this week, and the boys obviously are going to be in a pretty weak state of health right now. The main priority at the moment will be to get them medical treatment, divers with medical training to get in to treat them and get them food and try to rebuild their strength before they even think about how they're going to bring them out. And I have to say, at the moment, well, you can hear all the generators going. Some of those are refilling air tanks for the divers. Some are driving pumps that are constantly pulling water out of the caves. And I think at the moment for the authorities, they're hoping that's their best bet, just to keep pushing water out to a point where perhaps when these boys have recovered their strength, they can get them back through these very difficult tunnels.
So, Jonathan, are those meetings going on as we speak in terms of determining tactics? Have they alluded yet to whether it is simply to sit and wait and try to drain the caves, or because of the rains, do they anticipate that it will be divers that somehow have to get these boys one at a time through these waters and through these tunnels?
Well, that is the dilemma. There are meetings going on at this minute with the Chiang Rai governor, who's been the very impressive spokesman for this now multinational operation. He's not going to talk to us until tomorrow morning and give us an idea what their thinking is. It is an enormous challenge. We haven't got them out yet, but this itself is an extraordinary moment. You know, so many people looked at the odds of even finding these boys alive after so long, after the possibility they've been swept away by what have been really challenging flood conditions that have beaten back even the most experienced of divers, and they found them and they're okay. That's a hell of an achievement, and right now I think everyone's just absorbing that extraordinary result before they start sitting down to confront what is obviously going to be a very difficult recovery operation.
Yes, you're absolutely right in that assessment. Jonathan Head there at the caves. Thanks very much for bringing us the latest details as we return to more of the live pictures, because exactly as Jonathan was describing, hundreds of rescue workers, hundreds of military personnel, special forces, divers, all gathered there at the caves, as well as those in charge trying to work out strategy. And as Jonathan was saying, those meetings going on now as they work out how exactly to actually tackle the task now that lies ahead. Let's speak to Bill Whitehouse from the British Cave Rescue Council. We spoke to him several times during the course of last week. Bill, welcome back to the programme. I was talking only about 45 minutes ago to another international rescue team who described it as 1 in a million, the fact that they've got to these boys and they are alive. Is that an assessment you would share?
Yes, I think I would. It's incredible news. I mean, I think we all hoped that that would be the case, because you have to be optimistic when you're working on exercises like this. But when it actually comes out, I think we were all extremely pleasantly surprised, to say the very least, when the news broke earlier this afternoon.
Now, one of the international team is a colleague. I think 3 of your organisation went over to help, but one of them actually had experience diving in these caves. How useful was all of that?
Well, I don't know that it's so much that he dived in there. He'd certainly been in the caves, but I suspect that that would be when it was not flooded. But that would have been very useful, because it means he's got an intimate knowledge of what the passages would have been like when they weren't flooded. So when planning operations, when they are flooded, at least there's some knowledge of what the nature of the passages. So yes, that would have been extremely useful.
Give me a description, because when we talk about caves, you see the entrance, it's brightly lit. These boys were, I think it's about 4 kilometres in to the complex. Give me an idea of what it is like trying to actually carry out a rescue, trying to dive through all of that.
Well, I mean, all caves are different, and I have no personal knowledge of this particular cave, although I have got a survey of it and descriptions and things. The first part of this cave is open to tourists, about the first kilometre or so, and then it gets smaller. And it's a wild cave, if you like. There's no sort of lighting or anything like that in it. And the boys penetrated quite a way in here before they were cut off by the floods and had to retreat to somewhere where they could sit it out, which fortunately they were able to do. Now, what we've got now is a cave with a number of flooded passages in, which the divers have managed to penetrate and clear. Clearly, they've had to clear some blockages which would have occurred by the silt carried in by the floods. But they've managed to get through that, and they've managed to reach them. Now, it's a big problem how to get them out again.
Yes, well, that's what I wanted to ask you about, because we spoke Monday and Tuesday last week, and on the Monday you said if they found the boys alive, it would be a real last resort to actually have to get them out using diving equipment. So just tell me in detail some of the problems that you think lie ahead.
Well, there will be problems with the nature of the passage. I don't know whether there are any particular constrictions or anything like that, or any still blockages that need to be cleared. How much of the passages are still underwater? So they've clearly got to dive the missing people out one by one, out through the passages before they can get them out to the entrance. Now, diving just one person out of those circumstances would be a huge operation. Diving 13 out, well, it's going to be at least 13 times as difficult.
And the fact that they simply will never have used diving equipment before, they've been in those caves for 9 days, one has no idea psychologically the damage, how hard that has been, the risks of all of that, of trying to actually get someone out in that condition.
Yeah, well, we don't know what condition they're in. I mean, all we know is that they are alive, and clearly divers will now be able to take supplies through to them and they will be able to give them something to eat and some good, decent water to drink and so forth. But they've still got to come out, and they won't any of them be divers, I wouldn't imagine. So they are going to have to be dived out through what must be pretty terrifying circumstances. The complete darkness, underwater, using breathing apparatus they're not familiar with. So it's possible. It will be slow. It will take a lot of planning, and how easy or difficult will depend on the nature of the passage, how long the sumps are, i.e. the bits of flooded passage. So there's a lot to consider. Your correspondent talked about planning operations going on now. I'm sure they are.
Yes, exactly on that point, because you don't know these particular caves in any detail,
No.
but you would have been involved in rescues. Give me an idea of how flexible, how nimble you have to be when dealing with a situation like this, as a rescuer, as a planner, trying to look at how you approach something like this.
Well, obviously very carefully, because there's all sorts of things that can go wrong, and you have to plan to prevent them going wrong, or to be able to react quickly if anything does go wrong. I know that the divers today, whilst the divers were up front, pushing towards to try and find the missing party and laying guidelines while they were going, others were following up. And one of the things they would have been doing is creating dumps of air bottles at intervals through the flooded cave to be there ready to be used. So there will be a lot more of that, pre-positioning of dive bottles and so forth. There will be a lot of pre-positioning when they're ready to evacuate of divers in certain parts of the sump, so that, or in the sumps and the passages, to pass the missing party out one by one. Whether they try to do it taking one of them right the way through and then going back for another one, it will depend on what resources for divers they've got there. Or they might try and ferry them out, like a long train, if you like, and move, get ready, get everything prepared. And if they've got enough equipment, equip them all to come through. And if they've got enough divers to bring them through, try and move them all out at once. But I have no real idea. But they're the sort of things you would think about, particularly because we gather that speed is of the essence here, because the weather in the monsoon period is probably not going to stay kind for very much longer.
Yes, more rains are coming, more floodwaters coming. I think they have a couple of days. Bill Whitehouse, thanks so much for joining us again on the programme and so graphically explaining some of the options that those rescue teams are now grappling with. Thanks so much again for your time.
Thank you.
So as we look at these live pictures, more of the interviews, more of the officials there briefing the journalists of what they've done, what still lies ahead to be done. Contact has been made, so it has been an extraordinary last hour and a half. Let's recap and bring you the latest on this story, the latest on this rescue with Richard Galpin.
For more than a week, diving teams from Thailand and other countries have been picking their way through this long cave complex in the hope of finding the boys and their football coach. And now it seems Thai Navy divers have succeeded, just as that hope was fading away.
About the missing of 13 persons, the divers found the Pattaya beach was flooded. Then they went deeper, about 300 to 400 metres further. It is another high ground. We found the boys safe.
This photograph of the boys, aged between 11 and 16, was taken by their coach shortly before they went into the cave 9 days ago, on what was supposed to be a fun adventure for them. But inside, it's thought they were caught in flash floods, forcing them to move further into the cave complex in search of high ground. For their families who've been waiting outside throughout this ordeal, at last it seems there is some good news. This grandmother of one of the children says she's so grateful to the authorities for persevering with this rescue operation. But it remains unclear how they're going to get the children out without the boys needing to use scuba equipment. One hope is the authorities will succeed in pumping enough of the floodwater out of the cave system to enable them to get out safely. But it'll need to be quick as more monsoon rains are on their way. Richard Galpin, BBC News.
So let's go back straight to the live pictures, because
That's
enormous
fantastic.
activity there from the site of the cave, numerous interviews being done, numerous rescue teams, just huddles. You're seeing it everywhere around this cave complex, and arc lights, because now they have made contact with these youngsters and their coach. All of the focus is in terms of continuing that operation to drain the floodwaters, but also very much at the centre of everyone's minds how they now get to those boys and actually get them out. It's interesting, just on the ground, the authorities saying an hour or so ago, we found all 13 safe. We will take care of them until they can move. That's how they described it when they were speaking to reporters. We saw those scenes where they then broke into spontaneous applause and cheered those officials once they'd heard that news that the boys were safe and well. Let's go back and get the latest from Howard Johnson. And Howard, we were talking before, and we're also getting the latest from the caves from Jonathan Head, and all the focus now, enjoying the euphoria of the moment, but also looking ahead.
Yes, of course, we have this big issue at the moment with the rain that is forecast to come on Wednesday. What we've heard in the last half an hour is a Thai Navy SEAL saying that they are going back to the boys with gels, sustenance gels, energy gels and medical help to try to establish some good health for them to begin thinking about moving them out. As one of your guests said earlier on, they're going to have to learn how to use scuba diving gear to get out of this very complex series of caves and caverns that have been flooded. The worry now is that if the rains come again, all these efforts to pump water out, what they're saying at the moment is they're removing around 10,000 litres an hour. That's around a centimetre an hour, they're saying. If the rains come again, then these caverns and spaces will become flooded again. That will make things very difficult for the teams down there and for the 13 to get out of there. So the race is still on to get them out of there before these rains come.
And Howard, for the families, I mean, it is astonishing, isn't it? I'm just reading a quote from one family member saying, "I found out from the television. I'm so happy, I simply cannot put it into any sort of words."
Yeah, all week we saw the families. They looked very forlorn, very upset with this very worrying situation for them. They were in a tented area in a very hot and humid camp. It rained incessantly through the week. They had very little to keep them going. Occasionally they would be met by VIPs like the Thai Prime Minister. Even a prestigious monk came along to give them support. But tonight, a grandmother of one of the children said that they just wanted to thank the authorities for never giving up. All these teams that worked tirelessly through the night, whether they were down in the caves or above in the hills, above the cave complex, trying to find potholes down through to the areas where the boys were, or even other teams were diverting water courses to try and move the water away from the cave complex. So not only were they pumping it out, but they were diverting water from going in there. So those efforts will continue through the night. They'll keep pumping the water out, they'll keep trying to keep the water from going in there, and they'll be looking for other ways of getting them out before these rains come on Wednesday.
And Howard, as we've watched this day after day for 9 days, usually around this time, the operation grinds to a halt for the night. Now they've located them. Is the plan to work through the night, just round the clock?
Yeah, what we've seen over the last week is that the Thai Navy SEAL team have been putting air tanks at intervals through the tunnel. So they have got the potential to move their way out back towards the entrance along the series of chambers. You know, if we can imagine it, there's this big area called Pattaya Beach. That was the area just beyond it. That's where they found the boys. So they have to move through that area to another area where there was a bottleneck. They had to clear mud out of that today. And then there's a junction. They'll twist around that junction and they'll get to chamber 3. That was a forward command. That's where lots of these stocks and supplies have been put. Air tanks, the gels that they'll be ferrying to the boys, and medical kits, all the stuff is down there. Once at that point, it will be another 2 kilometers to the entrance of the cave, and then they'll be out into a media scrum, no doubt. Lots of people there waiting to find out how the boys are, how their health is.
Well, Howard, thanks for bringing us right up to date throughout the course of the programme. Howard Johnson there on the scene. Well, that's more or less it from today's programme. So often when we bring you breaking news, it is bleak news. Not today, but remarkable, joyous, uplifting news. The boys have been found alive and well. The task now is to get them out. Thanks for watching. See you next time.